Hi, everybody. We're in week 2 of Unshakable, and we're so glad to be here with you. I'm Pastor Ibyi, and this is my daughter,
Antonne.
And we're going to go through a part of this where we are going to talk about when you're pressed to conform. Have you ever been there? I have. And we're going to see how Daniel responded when he was pressed to conform. So we'll see, what do you do when someone in authority asks you to do something that violates your conscience and your convictions? You will need to know how to make unshakable choices, upholding what you know to be honorable to God. We have examples in the Bible, all throughout the Bible, of those who were tested, and they had to make some choices. They had to make choices that would honor God and honor the convictions that they held within. We have Queen Esther, who had to make an appeal for a whole nation. We have Joseph, who makes the same appeal to Pharaoh. And then in our New Testament, we have Paul, who consistently is before the Roman government making appeals. How do you make a case to an authority? What skills are required? In Daniel chapter 1, it shows us how this is done. And what's remarkable is that Daniel is only 15 or 16 years old, but yet he has developed this skill to make an appeal for those things that he held true to his heart. Remember that he was captured by the Babylonians when he was only 15 or 16 years old. And he's in this place where the king is ordering for him and his friends to eat the food from his table. And you might wonder, well, what's the big deal? Well, what it is that King Nebuchadnezzar was Babylonian, and they were heavily involved in pagan gods. And so their foods had no restriction. But Daniel and his friends had been born into the laws of God, and they had restrictions on their diet. And he wanted to honor God even in the things that he ate. But what gave Daniel the courage to stand alone and not conform to the values of the society? Daniel lived in close relationship with God. Daniel walked with God. He knew God as his friend. He had God's presence in his life. He had God's promise in his heart. He had God's power in his spirit. And he was just fearless. Let's look in verse 9. I love this when it says, "But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to him by the king." And I'm sorry, that's verse 8. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Now God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel. That's our point number 1. Develop a reputation for being responsible. Daniel, through the power of God, had been given favor. He was known by his character. He was known to be responsible. See, Daniel stood out. Daniel had a good attitude. He was responsible. He had consistency. He was loyal. And all of these character traits had meant something to this chief of staff. The Bible, there's also another Bible verse that even tells us what this looks like. It says in Proverbs 22:29, "If you do your job well, leaders will notice and you will serve before kings." This serve before kings means that you're going to get a promotion. You let your character be the thing that stands out the most. Be responsible. Don't give excuses. Because when you're responsible, then you get the respect of other people. The fact is, people with great responsibility notice people who are responsible. So don't be a slacker, in other words. Represent God well. Do everything as you would unto God. And then that gives you favor when you go in to appeal. But we have some more points. So Antonne has the next one.
Right, and that second point, when we look at Daniel's experience, was that he was able to be humble and not be belligerent. And so when we see the life of Daniel, Daniel is in a position of not being at a place of peace and being able to eat from the table, but his approach and how he corresponded with them came from a place of humility and not of a hostile, angry, or pushy kind of way. He just humbly made his request known. And so if we look at the verse in Proverbs 25:6, it says, "Don't demand an audience with the king or push for a place among the great." So we see that Daniel was not pushy. He wasn't trying to start a war, but what he was trying to do was humbly make his request known. And oftentimes we don't use the word belligerent today, but just the idea of like bringing hostility or trying to demand your way or to be seen, a lot of times those are the very people that we want to avoid. Mm-hmm. And so we see that Daniel's posture was that I'm not going to push my way, but I'm just going to stand firm in what I believe and allow God to do the rest. So as we look at Daniel's life, we can apply that to the things that we appeal when there's things that are in conflict with what we know to be true, that our approach and our position should be one of humility. So I think that there's some more points that we have as well.
All right, number 3. Point number 3 says, don't be deceptive or manipulative. When you're pressed to conform, don't misconstrue or even color your words to get your way. And instead, be honest. Don't make up stuff. You know we can filibuster, but that's not honorable. Have truth in your heart. Speak from your heart, but speak the truth. And then they'll know that where you're coming from has a great deal of passion, but at the same time is coming from a place that resolves within you that you live by. So be upright. Have a purpose. Have a plan. God doesn't dwell in lies, but he dwells in truth. I love how Daniel says in the 12th verse, he says, please test us. In other words, he's a man of integrity. He's like, just go ahead and test us in this thing that we want to do. And we're going to hold ourselves upright. You can watch us. You can see what we're doing. But would you just allow us to do this? Would you trust us in this? So that's the same thing with us. When we are making an appeal, when we are asking for something that we feel is the right thing, let us do it with the most honorable way, in the most honorable way that we can. Tell the truth. Don't manipulate. And even in this place where we see Daniel, and even though he went to the chief of staff and then we see him going to the attendant, he wasn't being manipulative. He was just honoring them in their position, but yet still from his conviction, moving in a very, if you see it, he's very gentle in how he approaches them. But not only is he gentle, but he's doing it God's way. So again, in 2 Corinthians 4:2, it says, we reject all shameful and underhanded methods. We don't try to trick anyone or distort the word of God. We tell the truth before God, and all who are honest know that. So you might as well tell the truth. People can tell when you're not telling the truth. But most importantly, God knows. Okay, Antonne, point number 4.
And the fourth thing that we're going to need to do is to appeal to the authorities' goals and interests. We see this in Daniel's situation because he understands that, hey, we want the same things. You want me to be my best, I want to be my best. And the best way that I can do that is by making sure that I honor God, by continuing to do the things that I know is right and best for me, which is to eat the way that I know that I should. And so we see that Daniel didn't come across judgmental or to put them down or to say, you guys are completely wrong. Instead, he said, hey, we want the very same thing. We just have a different way about doing it. And so he didn't try to tell them how wrong they were, but to just be an example of what was the right thing to do. And so when we are having our situations where somebody may believe that this is the way in which we have to do it, and we might have a different way about it, the best thing to do is to find a way to come from a place where we are appealing to their goals and interests and letting them know, like, hey, we're on the same team. Mm-hmm. Because I believe that the scriptures show us that it's better for us to come to a place of understanding and a place of unity than to come at a place of division, because nobody will be able to hear. Philippians 2:3-4, it says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look out not only for your own interests, but also to the interest of others. I believe that a lot of conflict and a lot of disagreements or ways that we're not seeing eye to eye could be mediated from us coming from a place of understanding and seeing the other person's goal and what they may be interested in, and finding that unity there, and then being able to make our appeal from that perspective. So we see that for Daniel, he had to understand that we are on the same team because we desire for me to be the very best that I can be. And the only way that I can do that is by making sure I uphold what I believe. So we see that in Daniel's life, and I believe we have one more.
Well, let's see. It says that our next point is choose the right place, time, and words. And when I looked at this, then I thought, choose the right place, choose the right time, choose the right words. The first thing is the right place. What's the right place? Always private. You will get your best results when you approach someone in a private space. When you go to them in public and when you put people on blast, you are setting yourself up for a defense. You have already opened up yourself for them to defend their stance and what they're doing. Instead, this is a part of respect. When you do it in a private time, you're respecting them. You're not putting them out there in front of everyone or pressuring them to make a decision. Because majority of the time, when you pressure someone to make a decision, it won't be in your favor. So, in public, before an audience, guarantees a defense and a denial. When you do it in private, you have a greater possibility of them reasoning with you. And the next one is, you got to do it at the right time. You know, timing is so important. I wouldn't advise you to lobby your friends or your husband or your wife, not when they're just coming in from work, not when they've had a hard day, and even youth, kids. Don't go to your parents when they just walking in the door, because you're not going to get the answer that you really want. Instead, you gotta really pay attention, discern when is the best time to do the approach. When you want to talk about your curfew, that's not a good time when your mom is already trying to prepare dinner. That's not a good time to approach her. And wives, when you want a little extra money for your something, and you know your husband's real tight on that budget, it's not a good time to talk to him when he's just walking in the door. Timing is important. There's a right time and a wrong time to bring up an issue. And then, right words. Right words mean you should do it in a polite way. Don't pressure or push yourself on people. Choose the right words that will let them know that you're considering them. And we see that throughout the conversation with Daniel. He never pushes his way in with them. Instead, he does it in private, he does it at the right time, and he uses the right words. The more pleasant his words were, the more persuasive he was. And here's the other thing that I want you to write down. I'm never persuasive when I'm abrasive. I'm never persuasive when I'm abrasive. Just keep that in mind. And we also have a verse that actually goes along with this about choosing the right place, the right time, and the words. A wise, mature person is known for his understanding. The more pleasant his words, the more persuasive he is. What blows my mind is Daniel's only 15 years old, but yet he had these skills. He chose the right place, he chose the right time, and we see that he chose the right words. And finally,
we must trust God if they reject your appeal. You have to trust God, even if they reject your appeal. For Daniel, what we see is that Daniel's appeal was actually accepted. But that wasn't, I'm sure that there were going to be many times in Daniel's life as he continued on his journey that some of his appeals would not have been seen as favorable. They weren't going to be readily accepted. But we have to be in a posture of whether it goes the way that we want it to or not, that we have to remember that we have to trust God. Because Romans 8:28, one of my favorite verses, it says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. And sometimes we forget that this is a gift and a promise that God has made to us, those who love God. That this is not something that just happens all the time and to everyone. But because we love God, he's going to work all things. So whether it goes well or it does not, whether they see it the way that we see it or they don't, if they accept or reject, we know that God is going to work all things. He's going to work the good and the bad, the friendly and the unfriendly. He's going to work all of those things for our good because we love God and we've been called according to his purpose. That everything that we're doing in our lives, the way that things are panning out, that is all according to his plan. And it may not be good, but he's going to work it out for our good. So as we look at Daniel's life, he'll go through so many different things, but this is just one part of his story where he makes an appeal, and he does it in a humble way, that his reputation, as he comes to them, precedes him, and they see that his reputation is one that is honorable, that he's not trying to be deceptive, but that he comes to them appealing not only to his own goals and interests, but he comes to them recognizing like, hey, we are on the same team. I understand your goal. I understand your interests. I want to work on this team the best way that will bring honor to God. And so we also see that he chooses the right words. He chooses the right place and the right time. And in his persistence and him trusting God, he was able to see that happen in this instance. And for the glory of God, he was able to be stronger. And God was able to bless and provide for Daniel and his friends where they were the healthiest ones in the group.
they sure were.
And so we know that God will never fail us and that his promises are unshakable.
Yes.
And that as we are pressured to conform, we can go into these difficult places with the posture that Daniel represented, where we will say, God, I trust that you are going to give me the words to say. You're going to give me the right place to do it in. And God, regardless if it happens the way I think it should, I trust that you are going to work it out for my good.
That's right.
So I think that this would be a great time to go ahead and start to talk a little bit more about this in our groups. And I hope that we really are able to unpack it and see how we can apply it right now in this week that we have and continue to make these appeals so that our city will be blessed, because we are the people who are coming in with honesty, with integrity, with great reputation that can begin to bring change in and around our city. So thank you for letting us speak to you today, and I hope that you are blessed by your discussions.
God bless you. Bye-bye.